Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Seago, and welcome to Let's Talk Native. I'm John Kane, and I'm joined here in studio by a familiar guest and a kind of a new guest, but it's kind of a unique situation. I've got father and son. I've got Ross John Sr., who has been on my show many times, and for the first time, I have his son joining us, not only as another Ross John, but as a special guest to talk about something that's really timely and really kind of important that we want to get out there. We're trying to promote an event, but we're also trying to commemorate an anniversary. We are coming up on the 40th anniversary of the Jim Thorpe longest run. And Ross was one of those runners. And for those who are not familiar at all, this was a run that began in New York City and went all the way to Los Angeles. It began on May 24th of 1984, and they traversed the country, crossed many states, stepped into a couple, perhaps. I know as many as 13 states had our footsteps on it, and they ended up in Los Angeles on July 19th. The run started in New York City and came to Onondaga. So there's a couple of start dates. They have a start date in New York, and then they got a start date coming from Onondaga. So let me first introduce Ross John Sr. to talk a little bit about the run itself. Ross, when you guys did this, we're talking about 1984, so we're coming out of an era of activism, for both the sovereignty movement that was being pushed by some of the burgeoning warrior societies, the Mohawk Warrior Society in particular, coming out of things like Gunyonge, the takeover of Gunyonge, the takeover of Alcatraz, the takeover of the BIA building. Right. There were all of these things happening. Of course, there were the tragedies of things that took place, like in Pine Ridge and Wounded Knee. But Native people kind of got on the map coming out of the 70s. And by the time we get into the 1980s, now we're really trying to affect change. We're trying to change everything from the way our children have been ripped away to not only boarding schools for over 100 years by then, but foster care and all that other stuff. That was kind of the undercurrent for some of what you guys were doing when you did this run.
Yeah, and a lot of it really comes from kind of AIM movement and the fact that Dennis Banks was in holding up in Onondaga at the time.
Yeah, that was kind of a political stance.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was.
it was.
They talked about Dennis Banks being granted sanctuary, which is not something that Onondaga is particularly famous for. So this
Right.
was kind of a unique thing. Considering that Onondaga was not exactly what we would call pro-warrior, they seemed to be a little bit more pro-AIM at that time,
Right.
and they did grant Dennis Banks the opportunity to stay there while he was wanted.
So it did provide an interesting mix of the different types of movements because you had the movement for rights, and that was almost like a civil rights movement for Native people, and that was kind of really where AIM was at. And then you had the sovereignty movement, which was more Iroquoian movement. You had the women's rights movement and all those other kinds of things that were kind of going on at the same time. So I was kind of, I don't want to say caught in the middle, but I was watching the sides.
Right, right.
And I was participating in supporting. I did some volunteer work at the International Treaty Council, which was in New York at that time.
This is before we were kind of booted out of there, right?
Yeah, we got booted out of there. Not too long after, around that time of the run, basically. Because of the political movement of getting native issues introduced to the world stage.
Well,
So,
and again, AIM, gets much of its origins from the policies that were trying to drive Native people off of Native territories into urban areas, and I think AIM begins trying to provide support to, and a sense of community for that matter, to Native people who were displaced and living in cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, many of the major cities. That during the Nixon administration, they had what they called a relocation program, where they were trying to give a crappy
right.
job and a crappy apartment and trying to sever the ties to community. AIM came in and actually created a different level of community in those urban areas, and eventually some of AIM's work got back to native territories, back
Yes.
to the reservation.
Yeah. And Dennis, I don't want to say just Dennis, but the whole organization, then the spin-off organizations that happened, they were doing a lot of promotionals. Before the run, there was the walk, and then there was the takeover, like you were saying, of the BIA building in Washington, Alcatraz, all those other kinds of things that were happening up this way. It was Moss Lake, it was Ganyange, it was,
Well, and that's where some of the
bridges. And
sovereignty movement almost merged with some of the more what I would say more national movement of AIM, because not only did the warrior societies become known coming out of Mohawk territory, but we had Louis Hall's flag that got out there, and pretty
right.
soon people started flying that flag all over the U.S. and Canada, and this idea of the sovereignty movement being tied to our traditions and to our territories, kind of married with in this case married a little bit with the AIM.
That flag I saw all the way across the country in different spots, so it was influential.
And that was
People
pretty
had
new back
recognition.
then.
Yeah, and it wasn't very well known.
Yeah.
So it was a good promotion for that.
Now the other thing that was happening, and we'll understand the irony of it, is that there was also this push because we couldn't put a lacrosse team in international play. So in 1984, there was a push to try to get the Iroquois Nationals, essentially what was being regarded as our team collectively, as far as the Haudenosaunee goes, to be allowed to compete in, I think it was the World Cup games that was going to be played, ironically, in Los Angeles.
Yes.
So that was one of the other elements that was tied into this run, was to push this idea that it's our game. We should be playing. We should be allowed to play in these international competitions.
Yes, it was first time in the end of the run. Actually, we ran into the fairgrounds or whatever where they're hosting the World Indigenous Games, and it was the first time.
Or the World Cup, not
the
even
World Cup.
Yeah.
Where our native boys at the time were first time that they were allowed to play international play,
Right.
and then the movement kind of kept on going, and we're still doing it today. So
Well, and
it's still relevant.
Ironically, one of the biggest obstacles became for international play tied to the notion of the Haudenosaunee passports and the inability for our teams to travel on our own travel documents. So once we finally got some of the international sporting authorities to allow us to play, we were still fighting the U.S. and Canada over recognizing our own passports, our own travel documents. So it turned into almost a different fight, still connected to lacrosse, still connected to international play, and frankly, we're still there.
Right.
And the one thing that happens that kind of takes that off the table is when we play domestically, and we'll talk about this more later on, but the 2028 Olympics are going to be held in Los Angeles, and there's a big push right now to try not only because it looks like lacrosse is going to be in the Olympics. The question is, are we?
Right.
And so now once again there's a push, and we're hoping that commemorating this run, talking about the event that we're currently planning right now, can lead to potentially another run to Los Angeles from New York City to Los Angeles to to push for the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee, Team Haudenosaunee, both men and women for that matter, to play in the Olympics. So it's kind of comes full circle a little bit.
Yeah, that's what we're really trying to promote again. Is probably a good starting point to rethink about all that, kind of get people recommitted to, kind of across the continent, basically getting Native people's minds together and prepared to kind of really promote that kind of unity effort. But we still have issues.
Right, right.
Um,
And we have different issues in each territory, but we have common issues. Now, as far as the first run goes, it was basically Native people from all over.
yes.
I mean, you were a part of it, and I know there was a few people out east here. So there was Jerry McDonald from Akwesasne. I think the was it
Donald Swamp, Jerry McDonald,
Tracy?
Lori Gisman,
Oh, yeah.
Tracy Thomas. I think we were considered the 4 or 5 original runners that represented the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois end. But there was people. We had runners from Alaska. We had runners from the Lakotas.
You picked up
and
people
down
every step along the
Cherokee.
way, from what I
Yeah,
understand.
there's some that started, and then there were some that actually dropped off, and then there's some that jumped on later on. And we also ran with local communities. When we came into their communities, most of them, Native communities, met us outside of their communities, and we ran in with them, or they ran in with us.
Now, and you also had obviously there were non-runners who were very much involved in this, and we were talking the other night. We talked about Margot Thunderbird and the role that she played in going out in advance to try to map out a little bit where you guys would be running. So there was, I mean, there were people that were involved in this in the planning, not necessarily so much in the
Right.
running.
I think I owe it as for me is kind of remember there. There's a tribute to all those people that kind of did all the work, all the behind the scenes kind of work, and Margot and company. People didn't realize that there was another 40 something days of travel before this,
Right,
going to all the territories, mapping everything out. Putting times together between distances and really trying to coordinate that. And then coming back and jumping back on the run. We had actually had some entertainment with us, like Floyd Westerman, the Thunderbird sisters, and then
and there were celebrities along the way that
well,
kind of popped in,
sure
just in
did.
general, right?
Yeah, and then we also had our own drum, so it wasn't just runners. There was a drum that came along. We had a crew that was basically the cooking for us and preparing meals, and would go ahead to different sites and do that.
Now,
So I don't want to forget any of those.
Somewhere
people.
along the lines, it wasn't always just comfort along the way. Sometimes it got
No.
it got a little sketchy there, so you don't know what they were cooking for you. Sometimes,
Yeah.
right?
No, there were times that we really didn't have much to eat because there was a rub again because it was the same year that Olympic torch was running through. The Olympic Games were in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's right. You were kind of paralleling that
Yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we actually had different officials from the U.S. kind of going ahead, and it was mostly in the non-native communities, church communities. There were people that.
But did you meet with any direct resistance, or was it resistance that was kind of getting smoothed over before you came into an area, or did
No, people. The doors were closed at the end. It was kind of thing that happened with most of it.
you sleeping in the manger, were you?
Right. And so, you're running, you got 175 miles, say, in for the day between the team. And then all of a sudden you're looking at it and saying, our next destination is 225 miles away, and we got to keep going.
Now, Rossi, you set up a Facebook group page for this, commemorating the event and promoting the and we haven't even discussed it yet, but promoting what we're trying to plan now today to commemorate what took place 40 years ago.
So to piggyback off of what you guys were saying is the label for this was the great Jim Thorpe longest run, and even though at the time you guys 40 years ago could have picked any sort of cause, AIM and the organizers looked at it as a way to bring awareness to reinstate Jim Thorpe's 2 gold medals from the 1912 Olympics that were taken away just because he played a few quote unquote professional baseball games, which
Right.
at that point were
It wasn't exactly a lucrative profession.
it wasn't, and
It's like $20 or something you got paid.
Yeah.
and if people are wondering, that's essentially the reason for the actual original run. And what's going on now is it took 110 years, no matter what, and Jim Thorpe's family finally got his gold medals. The Olympic Committee finally did it at some point, but at this point, for this 40 years is to basically commemorate the the feat that happened to what you guys did.
Yeah.
So just some quick stats. When they left New York City May 24th of 1984, it took a total of 58 days for you guys to get all the way to LA. We counted at least 13 states, possibly 15. So they went through New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California, possibly Idaho, Michigan.
That was just a couple of us, maybe too.
Yeah, you
Sidetrack.
got lost.
Yeah,
right?
we got lost.
And then you guys were probably averaging at least 150 miles a day?
At one point, it was we were averaging about 170s, 175, but that average really went up
In a relay.
after people stopped. We got shut out of a couple of places that were.
So you had to go farther.
Yeah, our average went up at that point.
And it was relay style, right? You guys would do, anywhere up to 10 miles each, and then somebody would go on from there, and you guys would just kind of compile all that together.
I was on a team of 5 people, and so we'd start out when everybody was getting up and doing the sunrise ceremonies and having their breakfast. We hit it up. Our goal was to do the first 50 miles, so we each do 10 miles, and however we wanted to break it up. It could have been sprints. It could have been 10 miles at once, 5 miles, quarter miles. We decided we were fortunate enough to have a Wisconsin runner by the name we call him Fox Chi, but his name was Marvin Chi from Fort Defiance, New Mexico. He was training, so we just kind of followed his regiment.
There you go.
He put it to us. Really, I got to tell, it was a good experience.
So we kind of have some old certificates and some photos from your guys' time, and it kind of varies, but we're thinking that they did 3,900 miles during that entire time. Obviously, going coast to coast, if you Google it, it's a little bit different, just because you guys end up going a little bit more north instead of the most direct route, because you guys specifically wanted to hit certain native communities along the way.
Yes.
So as a part of the commemoration for this 40 years, on the Seneca Nation, our local recreation program, the Cattaraugus Community Center, they're doing basically a community run challenge or program, where as a community we all want to get together to just collectively add up the total for all the
log in miles.
Log in your miles for the same amount of time. We're looking at starting May 24th, going all the way to July 19th of this upcoming, spring into the summer, and doing kind of the same thing. And, whether it's walking, whether it's running, doesn't have to be, 10 miles a day. Just
Wheelchair, whatever.
Whatever it is. The Seneca Nation wants to commemorate that feat of what you guys did over those 54 days as a community, to get people active and just kind of remember why you guys did this.
First off, give me the Facebook group page name. What is it?
It is the 40th anniversary of the quote Great Jim Thorpe longest run.
Okay, and you say it's community, but essentially the way we're really trying to push this is we're opening this up to anybody. It's not just here. In Seneca territory.
Of course, yeah. It's not just here on Seneca Nation territory. It's essentially you guys you had, I don't know how many different Native members, or even you hit up all these different Native communities. So anybody that wants to join this can join this.
It's for Native people to rededicate themselves.
Yeah, and for that matter,
for a lot of different reasons. I think we'll talk about.
Just like when you guys did it, there was non-Native support. So anybody wants to call into the community center, the Cattaraugus Community Center, and register. The registration is $40, and for that you will receive a long sleeve T-shirt and a pin commemorating the event. And then it'll be up to you to log your miles. It's an honor system. So I mean, we're asking people to look. If you're already a runner, just log your miles. And if you haven't run, then maybe this is a good thing to initiate some people doing some healthy activity. Get out there and walk and run, log some miles in. And look, if we can get 50 or 100 people, it's not unreasonable to reach not only the 200 or the 2,600 miles, but the 3,900 miles. So
Mhm.
we're hoping to get a big push, get a lot of people to register, and then get and literally we're hoping to get photos and everything else, so we can kind of put all of this out there so people can see how much they're willing to support not only what Jim Thorpe did, but what that run did at the time in terms of um, gaining attention to Native issues and frankly to highlight some of the Native issues we still have today.
Yeah. And just to remind everybody, the Cattaraugus Community Center is going to be doing that portion of it. You can give them a call, 716-532-8450. You can either ask for Brad or Susie B. They're the ones that are coordinating that part of it. Another thing, and it just so happens that the stars kind of aligned here, is the ending of the anniversary of this current run is July 19th, which is actually the Friday of our Salamanca Veterans Powwow. So our idea is to not only do some events just to commemorate the runners and give them honor for what they did, but we want to see everybody's pictures. There's people that are coming out of the woodwork now and be like, hey, I didn't think that anybody knew about that. Like, I've been telling this to my family. Part of them don't believe me, but here's my photos, here's my news clippings, and they're all starting to come out of the woodwork. And we're sending in an open invite to anybody that either helped on the run or even participated or even was
or
around.
just as pictures that are around. Went to one of the welcoming powwows or ceremonies or whatever.
The Facebook group would be a good spot to share some information, but yes, we're planning on doing some sort of ending the bookend of this event on July 19th, possibly even doing a mini long run from the Seneca Cattaraugus territory all the way to the Allegheny territory where the powwow is happening. It's about 33 to 35 miles, depending on where you start. But it's kind of the ideas that we're doing to commemorate this, but I mean, there's a lot more to this story besides just physical fitness and Jim Thorpe. I mean, there's essentially a whole another reason why you guys, did this.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and again, the whole idea is to try to get people from various communities. I mean, there may be a couple of 5K runs that are planned for
Right.
this. We've got some good runners in this community here already, and I know some folks are already kind of excited about it. But we're hoping to generate participation, across the country, U.S. and the Canadian side for that matter. If you follow the Facebook page, and I'll keep sending links on my pages, on my Let's Talk Native page and my Resistance Radio page. So I've heard some people say, geez, aren't you guys kind of doing this last minute? Not really. I mean, because, the organization to this it's not quite as extensive as trying to plan the run that you guys did.
Right.
So
Right.
we're really just trying to say, hey, get out there, run, log your miles, register, and we'll accumulate and tally up the miles, and hopefully we get somewhere between the 2,600 and 3,900 miles with everybody logging their miles in.
I want 10,000.
Oh, okay, there we go.
I want to triple that. But
But no, I think it's reasonable to get as the more people we get, obviously the faster those miles will rack up. Now I gotta mention something, and I've already offered a few comments, so I may have a few people getting pissed off at me already. But
Uh-oh.
I saw that Joe Biden issued Jim Thorpe the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor that can be granted in the United States. And they give it to him, obviously, I mean, he died, 71 years ago. And there's a certain part of me that finds that not just ironic, but distasteful. I mean, you're going to give somebody a Medal of Freedom that you took his freedom away. I mean, again, for those who don't know the Jim Thorpe story, which I don't know how you don't, but Jim Thorpe was ripped from his home and his family in Oklahoma and sent to Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. And just like many of the residential schools, he was among the children that was sent to these schools, and they were forbidden to talk their language or to hang on to any sense of their identity, native identity. The whole idea was to assimilate and do it forcefully. I mean, the slogan that that came out of Carlisle actually, and spread across all of these schools, including a variation that went to the residential schools on the Canadian side, was kill the Indian, save the man. Now, I mean, we can debate what that means, but it's clear. Most of it's pretty clear what it meant. It meant that they were trying to root out any aspect of our native culture from our children. It was an attempt to eliminate us through our children through assimilation. I mean, it's ironic that the definition of genocide sounds like the playbook for residential schools. It was children died in these schools, so there was death, there was physical harm, including sexual abuse. There was, for all intents and purposes, torture, to drive out any native identity. And of course, ironically, during the same period of time, you had all these non-native schools that were picking up native mascots for their schools. So little white kids could smear their mom's makeup on their face and beat on their oatmeal can and play Indian, while our kids were being beaten for being native. So that's what Jim Thorpe's experience was. So there was that. It was the taking of our children. It was the idea of creating the conditions that would cause us to no longer exist as a distinct people. And frankly, the other component that is part of the definition of genocide was the idea of sterilization, interfering with our ability to have children, and women, girls were being sterilized there. Of course, getting back to taking over the BIA building,
Right.
that was one of the things that that these guys had discovered was a whole lot of information about the sterilization programs that were coming, that was directly tied to Indian Health Services and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That was even outside of the residential schools. So I think again, it's not ironic. It's almost a slap to give a medal called the Medal of Freedom to a guy who had his freedom taken away, and basically used athletics, used his own ability to endure what he was going through and to survive it. I mean, because not everybody did. So I have a very different feeling. I see a lot of Native people, oh, it's about time, it's well deserved, it's congratulations and all that other stuff. But I always have, as you know, I always have a different take on some of these things. And when I see this, I'm somewhat disturbed by the idea that I mean, again, I feel like it's not only tokenizing him, but it's again Joe Biden thinking that he can reach a broader audience by doing something like this. And it took 110 years for him to get his medals reinstated. I mean, it's and of course, let's not forget, he couldn't compete in the Olympics for the Sac and Fox Nation or the Chippewa Nation, the nations that he was tied to. He had to, just like still today, unless we can change it with the Haudenosaunee lacrosse team, we can't compete representing our own nations. We're forced to either represent the United States or Canada for the most part, or frankly, Indigenous people throughout the world are never able to represent their own people, their own culture. We kind of got to do it almost as a backhanded way. And and then we hear these guys say, well, he was a citizen of this nation, of that nation. But were you really recognizing that if you weren't allowing him to compete? So that's my view. So I struggle with that a little bit.
Ole.
You guys don't have to agree with me. I'm just saying, I'm always gonna take a little bit harder view on this stuff. So
I kind of saw the same thing.
Yeah.
And found it kind of ironic that
yeah
they took his freedom away, and now they're making that statement.
I mean, you don't have to go far to come up with an analogy that would be absurd if it was about what Jewish people endured at the hands of Nazis, or frankly, what Palestinians are now enduring at the hands of Israelis. I mean, you think about somebody who is persecuted like we were by the United States through all these policies. Everything from removal to taking our kids to. I mean, that's not even talking about the massacres and all the other things, and the things we still endure. So one of the things that we talked about with this event, Rossi, that frankly you and the CCC are a big part of trying to organize. We talked about the cause, what it is that a person doing this now can run for. And maybe we can come up with some tags or some labels or something. I mean, look, the sovereignty movement is still something that we fight for, but we have missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have land back. We have Every Child Matters, or as I prefer, Native Children Matter. we have these issues that we still can put out there. I don't know more was was a kind of a Black Lives Matter for that matter.
Right.
There are any number of causes that we can dedicate our running in this event that we're doing this spring and summer. And that would be another thing great to get documented in pictures and and the like. So we're hoping that we can support the idea of running for a cause as diverse as that cause might be. I mean, look, we've got water keepers here in Seneca territory that are fighting to try to maintain the clean water here. We've got all other environmental issues. We've obviously been fighting and stood by the folks for fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline and Standing Rock, and so there's a lot of issues that we are, if not the lead in, and we are the lead in many of them, but we're certainly a relevant part of some of these causes. So I think there's any number of things. There's no way that if you wanted to do this, you shouldn't be able to find a cause. And frankly, dedicate it towards your grandmother, dedicate it to a family member.
And when you guys did the original run, I mean, AIM really could have went anywhere with it, but it was something that you guys felt was needed and it needed to be echoed because AIM had, as you guys explained, they had all these other movements, whether it's Alcatraz or what have you. So it was a singular. It's labeled as the Great Jim Thorpe Run, which was needed at the time to give the awareness that, hey, like he still does not have his gold medals at that point. And at this right now is the good thing about social media and like this podcast is we can echo any story. It could be small to us right now, but with enough voices, you can get it out there and make enough people aware of what you're passionate about. There's saving the Oak Flats. You got all these timber rights that are happening in the
Water
north.
rights,
North. It's just like what do you use a little bit of what it's just physical fitness and dedication, but bring your awareness to it. It's like, well, I ran 5 miles today for my Uxode, my grandmother. Like she passed away from cancer. You can pick anything. It can be something so small where it's like, oh, I'm running for my son or my daughter. I want to be a role model to them. Or hey, I'm trying to stay clean. Like I'm
running for sobriety.
I'm running for sobriety. Like it could be anything so small
or personal or bigger.
It's just you want to make it as big as possible, go right ahead. You want to keep it as small as possible, go right ahead. It's just keeping the motivation for us all to be as a collective supporting each other as Native people and be like, yes, you did a mile today, great. Like keep it going. Just try again. Keep doing.
And maybe this becomes a lifestyle change in general,
Right.
And that's obviously what you're hoping to see with some of these folks. For any of us who've gotten lazy and maybe a little old, maybe maybe it gets us moving again. I do have to bring up one thing. We didn't even talk about this before. There's still an ongoing battle over Jim Thorpe. There's a battle over getting his remains returned. Did you know this?
I forgot about that.
Yeah, there's a fight right now because I believe I don't know where they're in Pennsylvania someplace, I guess. I don't know if they're on the Carlisle Indian School grounds, but they've been repatriating some of those grave sites there. But I think there has been a in fact, isn't there a town called Jim Thorpe?
There is. Yeah. They had somebody on the Facebook, the group that we have actually shared that they're doing a run. Maybe it's in a week.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's an actual in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. It's right by Carlisle, I believe.
And that may be where his remains are. So but there's a fight by some of his family members, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know how passionate this conflict has become, but I am aware of it, and so in many ways, Jim Thorpe is still a news item, even today. So
I mean, everybody knows that picture at this point of him. His shoes being stolen, where he's running in mismatched shoes.
Yep.
There's random people I talk to that are non-native and be like, oh yeah, I know that. The top defensive back award for college football is still the Jim Thorpe Award. So you have all these guys going into the NFL that are they may know very little, but they know who Jim Thorpe is just based on these awards that are given out in college. Like he's still a polarizing figure even this far after his death, and since his medals had been at least given back at that point. But
there's an interesting story associated with the fact that they tried to promote football so strongly at the Carlisle Indian School. They literally had kids playing against adults. I mean, they were fielding teams to play against Ivy League schools that were the premier football teams of the country at the time, and were it not for the refs really siding against them, um, our guys, even with smaller stature because of their age, were competitive against the premier football teams. And in many ways, I mean, we know that would never be allowed now because it would be considered child abuse.
Right.
But this was what Carlisle was trying to do so much. They were trying to promote their success, and they figured if they had successful athletes like Jim Thorpe, they could say, "See all the good that we're doing."
Right.
They're going to pretend that the harm that they were doing against these kids. And like I said, children died at these schools. Children died leaving these schools, and we're finding now in throughout Canada where they've been using ground penetrating radar, that there's been over 8,000 children or grave sites that have been discovered at or about these former residential school grounds. They haven't even started on the U.S. side, but we know, like Carlisle Indian School, they had a graveyard. And there was like 220 grave sites. Some of them actually said unknown on the gravestones. Don't ask me how you could have a child in a school, enrolled in a school, and you didn't know the child's name. But I also had a guest on the show a couple of years ago who had suggested that once Carlisle had realized that this was becoming a problem, the amount of children that were dying in their school, they decided they were going to ship home some of these kids that were on their deathbeds to reduce the number of kids that were actually died in their custody.
Right.
So the number may be closer to 700 or 800 kids that died because of these schools. So, I've heard people who talked about the residential schools in favorable terms. They said, "Well, I didn't think it was that bad when I went there or whatever." But I got to tell you, if you were already a Christian, if you already spoke English, if you already were most of the way there in terms of assimilation, and some were, then it probably wasn't a terrible experience. But man, if you were solidly embedded in your culture, if English wasn't even your language at all, not just your second language, but wasn't your language at all, it was a nightmare. And we've heard more and more horror stories about these residential schools. And I got to tell you, what Carlisle did with trying to use sports as a way to justify what they were doing. Yeah, it's great that somebody like Jim Thorpe was able to persevere in such an incredible way. But I mean, that's what they were using. They were using guys like him to justify their tactics and their policy.
I think one of the things that I don't want to miss is the fact that it was also a spiritual run, and that means a lot of things to means different things to a lot of people. But I think the thing that I really wanted to remind people of, or speak a little bit about today, is the fact that medicine bags were handed out, and there's also a lot of confusion about that. So I can only attest to what it meant to me.
But the idea of spirituality should always be a personal thing. It is not something that should be institutionalized or framed within a structure that a rigid structure that we have to always accept that. I mean, however it worked for you, because you were battling demons.
Sure.
And for you, I mean, even at that age, how old were you when you did this?
I was about 27, 28.
I mean,
I wasn't a teenager or a kid.
But you, even at that age, considered this run your own rite of passage in many ways.
Right. I think I finally realized what that old tradition of rite of passage really meant. How it was meant to clear your mind, set you straight, but give you the strength to be able to kind of stand on your own. Like you said, the spiritualism and where you're at is an individual thing. So everybody has to find it, within themselves. So, but that bag for me was a guiding force because I had to learn about it. And so when that bag was granted to me, even though I took soil and some stones and things that meant something to me in a parking lot at a Cleveland Indian Center at the time, because that's when I officially was given my medicine bag and had a ceremony.
Well, that I was actually going to ask you that, like, to kind of give your backstory on the actual run. So you've told us this story that you were supposed to just be an alternate from this territory just to Cleveland, right?
Right. I was actually on my way to ironwork in New York, and this group was running through, and so we went down with my ride. We were going to go back ironworking, and so we ended up at the Siller building down here on the Cattaraugus territory. And the group came through, and I knew a few people like Jerry McDonald, some of the other runners on there, and I just went down there to meet and greet, and maybe
they sucked you in, huh?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it was the ride that I had kind of canceled out on me, and said, "Well, I'm not going to go," because what I had to do in New York isn't happening. So all of a sudden they're saying, "Well, we need somebody to help almost protect the wampum that came from the Iroquois Confederacy, because there was a little bit of turmoil actually from the way that people do ceremonies from east and west, and it was kind of contentious. Just even the way that you go around.
There's almost nothing we do that doesn't
yes.
that doesn't bring a little bit of conflict. And I say it all the time. Many of the causes that we fought for, some of the first people we have to fight are our
Right.
own, and I'm sure that's what you went through.
It was it, and that was part of the experience, and it was the human experience. I think that was really most obvious to me, and so. I ended up going to Cleveland. Mad Bat Harrison, who was the chief out of Tuscarora, he's the one that convinced me to go. He says, "Well, I'll find out somebody else to take your place in Cleveland. So run with them in Cleveland."
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they tell me, "Mad Bear's downstairs. He wants to see you." And this is first thing in the morning, daybreak, and I seen him standing there with a group, and they're getting my medicine bag ready, and I'm looking at him. It's like, oh man, I know what this means.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm on the run.
Yeah, and that was it. He said, "I couldn't find anybody. I'm really counting on you," and
Well, and for you, it was a bit of a transforming event then.
It was.
I mean, even though you weren't just floundering with nothing to do. I mean, so
No.
this was something that you allowed to put the rest of your life on hold to complete and participate in.
Sure. And I think the whole thing is that once you take that commitment in the way I understood it and have continued to understand it, is that you're carrying the soil forward, and that's that commitment. I didn't understand it at the time, how much that run, in the effort of running and carrying that bag, and then going through different ceremonies, sweats, and territories and tobacco burnings and all those kinds of things, and listening to people from all over the territory and their interpretation of what all that meant, how much that fed into who I am today.
Right.
And so I realized at that point that I was being instructed to grow myself as an individual, to be able to, to be able to kind of transform myself, because we're a people now. When I talk to the elders on the run, they were looking for solutions, and they were saying, we've lost something. And the same thing that we're dealing with today is like our kids are killing themselves, alcohol, drugs, we have a lot of mental issues, depression, schizophrenia, suicide that's going on in our territories, and we're not quite understanding what we lost, but we know we lost something.
And you and I talk a lot about what we hope to do by trying to stimulate or generate another generation of activism. I mean,
Right.
because, again, having a cause can be a good motivator for not just for sobriety. I mean, that's one issue, but having a cause to fight for is important. And part of the thing is, we hear a lot of this generation call down the youth, and when they say, "Well, they're too busy on their phone, they're too busy this," well, then use that phone. I'm one of the ones who remain optimistic that the young people will pick up the mantle and take it farther than we did. And but we have to encourage them. We have, and that's what I'm hoping that even this part of what we're doing to commemorate the 40th anniversary, maybe as individual as it may be, we begin to have some of this sit with people. And it's not going to be necessarily that this event's not going to be the transforming event that yours was, but it's a start, and it's a way to begin some of that
Right.
conversation.
I think one of the things that I realized is that we were dragged along and to the industrial age, well, the agricultural age, industrial age, and now you're into the technological age. But what we've lost is our ability as groups to make decisions for the common good.
And stand up,
And so-
against some of
that-
what
But,
plagues us.
but John, that seems to be part of being a human being that we're missing. The more that we miss it, the more that we get dragged in, and it's not just us. That whole dilemma that I talked about depression and suicide and all these
Drug
problems,
abuse, substance abuse, all of
it's
it.
a part of the industrial world. It's part of capitalism.
It's essentially our residential schools.
Right.
I mean, it is the burden that this generation it has that's different than what Jim Thorpe and our grandparents went through.
Well, the community, that's where they tore apart the community. The community doesn't make decisions anymore. Families don't make decisions anymore on how to feed, how to take care of, how to nourish each other. We've taken on the European model of raising kids and all those other kinds of things. And I just think it's time that we start talking about it.
Well,
'Cause
and when you
we've
say
never
European,
really talked about it.
when you say European model, I mean, we've become so nuclear in our families that we don't have. I mean, we love the phrase "it takes a village to raise a child," but are we really involving our whole communities? I mean, and I
Right.
think we need to do more of that. And this is an opportunity for people to step up for a cause bigger than themselves. In as big a way as you feel you can do. I mean, so again, I'm hoping people will reach out to the Cattaraugus Community Center. You can ask for Brad or Susie B. And what's the number again?
Again,
Rossi?
it's 716-532-8450. Like we said before, it's $40. It'll come with a shirt, a pin, and then you'll be able to log in your miles. And like we were talking about before, is we hope to eclipse this total. And I want to see people being like, oh, somebody submitted from Washington State, somebody submitted from California,
Maine, yeah,
Maine,
yeah.
all these places. And one thing is also just putting this out there. It doesn't just have to be Native people too. Anybody wants to, because either way, the money is going through our Seneca, our recreation system. So either way, it's used as a donation or whatever it is. But
Right.
we're here to help promote not only getting everybody back physical fitness but just start promoting what is important to you.
Well, in 70, by some estimates, 70% of the native population lives off territory, and and that is cities like New York and in Washington and Los Angeles and Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago, Cleveland. I mean, we've got many native people, and there are a lot of urban native centers that exist in these places. And in fact, frankly, that's where AIM got some of its start. They were working as community organizers in some of these urban areas. So we do call upon native people and non-native people, even in the urban areas. And look, I've been to New York. I know how many people run up and down the the parkways. And so if you can dedicate your some effort of what you're doing anyway to this cause, register, log in your miles. I'm sure that we can blow past not just 2,600 but 3,900, and I don't think it's unreasonable to reach your 10,000 mile goal.
It's also the sense of the community that you guys are saying is like I'm asking any of you that are listening that want to join this, like start with your families. Just be like, hey, we're going on a walk tonight. Like we're gonna go do 2 miles. Like let's go branch it out, and then I'm hoping at some point your community just be like, I know in the Seneca Nation, we have the Deerfoot Running Club, and I just moved back to the area, but I'm hoping that some of us can get together at least a couple times a week and be like, we're gonna get like 2 miles in. You want to push it? Let's do 5. And each community, I'm hoping will get that sense of whether you got a running group, you're a walking group, just we all deal with things, stress, health issues, diabetes, all this stuff. Is just like use this as a catalyst to try to jumpstart something, whether it's your health or, like I said, motivation for anything.
And if you're not living, like I said, if you don't live in a Native community, I know one of the challenges is for Native people who have, for whatever reason, sometimes beyond their control, sometimes it's career oriented. But if you don't live in a Native community, this is one of the ways that you can reconnect.
Right.
I mean, this is a good way. And yes, it's we're doing it through the Cattaraugus Community Center, the Seneca Nations Cattaraugus Community Center, but you're going to see your name and your pictures and this effort alongside Native people from all over the country. It is a positive way to create a bit of a community effort, no matter where you live.
It's about understanding the old way of responsibility instead of rights.
Right.
And that's what adults, there's so many generations that are now just used to, this is my right, this is my right.
Well, and that's what everybody fights for, right? Native rights and civil rights and human rights, but we're saying there's a responsibility that comes before anybody can claim.
We want people to rededicate to their responsibility to those things that are around them.
And like I said, the causes can be anything. I mean, as some of you know, I've been trying to help in Akwesasne, some of a core group up there that's trying to stand up to a bad land claims deal. Yeah. And so when we talk about land back, I don't know how we talk about trying to get land back at the same time we're trying to settle claims where we're losing land. So there's so many causes, whether it's land or whether it's family, whether it's any of the hundreds of issues that Native people face. I mean, there was just a piece that was done. In fact, the Buffalo News of all places carried the story, but it was on Indian Country Today, where the Center for Disease Control has definitively, in fact, they were so shocked by the data they had to recheck it. They have definitively determined that Native people die death by cop at a higher rate than everybody else. Something I've been talking about for years, but now the CDC is listing this, and they're saying that we die at death by cop 5 times greater than white people and 3 times greater than black people. And that wasn't a crown that we were hoping to win from anybody, not black people or anybody else, but that's the fact.
All the things we lead in are things that we want to.
Yeah, we lead every list you don't want to be on, and this is just another one. So again, there are causes. When Every Child Matters or the Our Children Matter effort is tied directly to residential schools, but I think we have to be more definitive about this, because we currently deal with children issues, but when we talk about residential schools, we're talking about what was done to our grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents when they were children. Right. So many of us sit here as survivors of the survivors, and so I think there's so many issues that need more attention. And this is an opportunity for every individual to select what they want to.
I can't end this without putting a challenge forward for 4 years from now.
Well, that's just it. I mean, you consider that the Olympics is going to be in Los Angeles in 2028, and there is the push to try to get the Haudenosaunee lacrosse teams to compete in that Olympics. But you know what? That's again another issue. But I think we do need to raise attention to this. I mean, ironically, once again, there's going to be an Olympic torch that's going to be carried across the country. Right. So we have an opportunity to essentially compete with the attention that's going to try to garner as we once again try to make a statement. So we're hoping to use this event that we're doing here, basing it here in Seneca territory, involving people from all over the country, to gain a little momentum towards 2028.
Right. And I think that's the thing that I'd really like to kind of push towards, is to redo this again in 2028. I think another generation completing the definition of the causes that people need, looking at the situation that we're in. Lacrosse is one of the things that we can carry as a mantle that's achievable, that we can put political pressure on, but it's really, again, about trying to get the Native communities to come together to think about self-determination and, how we're going to survive into this century and prosper. So this
running
is a good way to kind of bring everybody's minds together.
Running is a sport, but it's not a sport that anyone just anyone can do this. I mean, so you don't have to be a premier athlete, but we have premier athletes. We do. We've
Sure.
got incredible athletes in all sports. I mean, we saw that even with with the women's basketball.
Right.
The NCAA tournament this year. I mean, native women stepping up. We see it with some of our locals who've gone to Division I schools to play lacrosse and are now playing professional lacrosse. So we've got athletes, but you know what? Anybody can walk a
Right.
mile. Anybody can run a mile,
So-
or put some steps in.
Send us your ideas. You
Yeah.
know, even if it's creative content. Whatever you want to do. I'd love to hear songs put together or raps or whatever. To kind of build those portfolios and try to get that all put together. Look forward for 4 years from now. People that want to be involved or just contribute. We're going to start from scratch.
Right.
I think we can go and make this happen again.
So we're starting with this, and this is kind of a less formal way of doing a run, but we're starting with this, and we're hoping we get some good participation. But know that this is a stepping stone to what we're hoping to do in 4 years. And look, even now we're hoping to call upon our athletes and our celebrities, and we're seeing more and more that our people are making it in other areas of entertainment and sports and that kind of stuff. So look, I'm calling on. That's my challenge. My challenge is all you guys who are now getting this attention. And I know there are people who have used their celebrity to address issues, and I hope you continue to do it. And let this be one of them. Let's talk about 2028, and let's not forget that there are still issues tied to Jim Thorpe and the very things that you guys ran for 40 years ago.
Sure.
We never finish a cause. We're always just a different place on the line for that. And so I always know that if we're fighting for children in the late 70s, we're still fighting for our children in this century. So these things don't go away. They don't solve themselves. We have made some serious headway on many issues, but it seems like the more we fight for something, the more we realize that there's still more to fight for.
And it's our responsibility. Nobody's going to do it for us.
Well, and this is our chance as again as we get older. I mean, and again, it's great to have your son join us on this show, but it's great to see this thing go from generation to generation. And Rossi, you're now you're getting older, and you're not the kids anymore. So so you've got
Unfortunately.
you've got younger people. You've got nieces and nephews now, and so and all the other young people in this community. We got to do whatever we can to get people motivated and really, it's like we've talked about before, Ross. We've got to empower younger people because we've got to hand it off at some point. And in many ways, we're talking about handing someone off. You and I aren't going to go out there and run to Los Angeles in 4 years. We'll be lucky to hail a taxi.
I can fall down and get up. Still do that.
So we're counting on you guys. So I want to thank you guys for joining me on the program. I want to thank you for the effort. And I know, Rossi, you've been I started seeing the pictures posted, and I didn't even realize that you guys had an event planned until you guys called me in. And I said, wait a second. Well, let's talk about this. Let's get this out there. So I was glad to have you guys join me for this podcast. As those of you who caught me last week, I'm almost relaunching Let's Talk Native as a podcast to do this weekly and to try to breathe a little life into it. I had the opportunity to do a show from Akwesasne last week. I've had the opportunity to bring in the Ross Johns into the studio this week. So stay tuned. We're going to be doing more of this, and this issue we will continue to talk about. So stay tuned. Keep checking out Let's Talk Native and my radio show Resistance Radio, and we'll stay on top of it. We just hope that you will as well. I want to thank you guys both, and I want to thank you for listening.
Yep.
I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio.